Really good. I mean, it's really good. It's really valuable.
Welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, today you're going to have the pleasure of re-meeting three people who are about to make New Haven tick in a new way. Three newly elected members of Board of Alders, bringing a lot of new energy and of excitement to the city's legislative body. Newly elected Alders Caroline Smith of Ward 9, Kiana Flores of Ward 1, and Frank Redente of Ward 15. They're all here with a little post-election wrap-up. Thanks so much for coming in, crew. It's great to see you all.
Excited to be here.
Thanks for having us.
And congratulations on winning.
Thanks. Thank you.
I think it's a big deal to be an Alder. You got thousands of people you're going to represent in this, it's sort of the most high-touch level of government. And how do you feel about it? How do you feel, Kiana? Are you excited? Are you 20 years old? How do you feel about all this?
Yeah, it's really exciting. It feels a little silly when everyone congratulates me about winning. When I did run unopposed, so I kind of had it in the bag when I was the first one to vote for myself in Ward 1.
That's right. You kind of knew you had it because you were going to show up.
Yeah.
But if you had a cold and you overslept,
right? Who knows what would have happened? What would have happened?
But you did still have to get involved in ward politics. I think you were a ward co-chair, right?
Yes, I was a co-chair under Alex, yeah.
And since high school co-op, you've been involved in activism. And how did it come about that you were the one chosen by the ward committee to be the alder?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty natural progression. So my freshman year at Yale, I actually worked on Eli Sabin's election campaign for Ward 7 my first semester. And so that was kind of my main introduction into local campaigns in New Haven. And then working under Alex as his co-chair, got to see a little bit more about how the board operated.
Alder,
yes, the current Ward 1 alder. And then this summer, Alex let me know that he did not want to seek re-election for another term. And so it felt kind of natural with the experiences that I had growing up in New Haven and the political experience I was able to get at Yale, and also studying New Haven to a greater capacity at Yale as well, that, this is a role that I believe I could take on, and kind of felt appropriate for the timing of me being a junior and then being able to serve out my 2 terms and then graduate and see where I feel about everything post-grad.
I remember Ward 1 is largely Yale.
Yes.
Do you have any not Yale in the ward?
Yeah, there are a couple of residential buildings. The 2 main ones are the Eli and the Sabin, right, off of the
Eli
green.
and the...
The Eli and the Sabin. There are 2 residential buildings.
Eli Sabin?
No. The Eli and the Union. Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, good catch.
I remember when Michael Moran was the Ward 1 alder, he then moved to he got to live somewhere else so he could still be alder another term. But, it's often been called the Yale alder.
Yeah. And,
in a city with this town-gown relations, I found there's always been a lot of respect for that Yale alder. I've always seen the alders who in that role are these people who come in so humbly. Yale has a reputation of being know-it-all and pushing people around. I'm thinking back, even down to Katie Kenny and Michael Moran and Janet Stearns and Stephen Pryor, who became a state commissioner of education and a leader in Newark and a city. All these people seem to find those 2 years and learn a lot, but something's changed now, which is that Marvin Krisloff became the president of Oberlin College, and they all kind of come in and they learn. I think what's humbling is they learn how the city works, and it's a little different from what they learn in their books. And there's sometimes Yale has a very look down your nose attitude at people in New Haven. You realize you're with these smart, dedicated people from different walks of life, and you're working with them. I always thought they all learned so much from it. And what's changed is that it was always students who came to Yale from somewhere else. But now you're the second alder who grew up in here. Not only grew up in New Haven, grew up in Fairhaven to an immigrant family. Mm-hmm. How do you think that changes the perspective of what that role is? You're now bringing a lifetime of New Haven experience about one of our most pressing issues and knowing one of our key neighborhoods in a way that the Yale alder didn't used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really exciting to be able to both represent where I am now, which is the Yale area, and spending a lot of time with that community, but then also coming from a background from Fairhaven, because I do think that it's informed a lot of what I'm passionate about now. So when I grew up in New Haven or in Fairhaven, it didn't really stick out to me as obvious, like how much local policy actually influenced my life and how much the local community in Fairhaven, I'm sure like the community in Fairhaven is so vibrant and so willing to work with each other. And a lot of it is immigrants, and a lot of my family that's still there are all immigrants from Honduras. And so it's kind of just a little space of community, especially that I think was so beneficial for my family, who like my parents don't speak English, but they could go to like the Seatown or go to the family-owned businesses on Grand and really feel at home in New Haven. And with the local policy part, I was able to take a class with John DeStefano, the former mayor at Yale. He has like a great policy class on New Haven. And when we talked about the immigration policies in New Haven, it was just insane to see how much change occurred under his leadership with immigration reform. So, for example, like the rules that they changed within like the New Haven Police Department to police immigration, or to change the laws of policing in New Haven to better accommodate
well, the
undocumented
big issue there
immigrants.
was that the immigrants were being routinely robbed when they got
Right.
paid at the end of the day, and they were afraid to go to the police because the police would ask about their immigration status. They felt they'd be turned over.
Right,
and
exactly.
they changed the policy they had in order not to. The other thing, you were 6 years old, I'm guessing, when he did the ID card.
Yeah,
so that
the
people
city
could
resident
open
card.
bank accounts and stuff. Do you remember that at all from 6 years old?
I don't remember it from being 6 years old, but what's crazy is that in that class, we watched like a video that I think was from The Independent about like when everyone was lined up outside of City Hall to get the resident
was
city
great.
card.
Yeah.
And we watched the video, and then I saw my uncle, and I was
Oh,
like,
yeah?
that is insane that like he was one of the first people to like get his picture taken. So it was a really nice moment in that class to really see like in my face the impact that those local policies had on my life and my family's
It's
life.
so wonderful how you lived here. You got involved in activism, a high school student with the climate movement, and then you're kind of studying at Yale political science. You get to bring that all together now in the real world as an alder. And we're talking to three newly elected alders, revved up for January 1st, Caroline Smith, Kiana Flores, and Frank Redente here on Dateline New Haven. So, Frank, you grew up in Fairhaven.
Yes.
And what made you, at this point, you're a little older than the others here, right? What made you at this
A lot.
point? You've done a lot of community work. Right now, you're a violence intervention specialist, which means you like try to stop kids from having beefs that turn into something worse, right?
Yeah, so I started working at Fairhaven School in 1995 when a lot of my friends were going away to prison, or I had lost a lot to gun violence. I got lucky. I got a job as a part-time security guard at Fairhaven School, where I currently work now. And, I've lived in Fairhaven my whole life, and I've just always cared about it. I don't ever see myself leaving Fairhaven. I got into the violence intervention work 2 years ago when Leonard Jihad approached me about a job. Part of it is canvassing around recent sites of violence. And I met great people in the process and got inspired to just take a look at, what it would entail for me to be an alder in addition to the two things that I already do. And, here I am today. I'm inspired by people like Caroline and Sarah Miller.
Why did you want to be an alder?
Fairhaven is in desperate need of change. I am the great-grandson of immigrants. It's always been the landing spot for immigrants. I work at a school that's predominantly immigrant families, and, not every one of them...
your grandparents are immigrants?
Yeah, from Italy. My father's
Southern or northern?
grandparents. What's that?
Southern or northern?
Southern. So, a lot of the people that I ran to represent can't vote. A lot of people come here from other countries looking for a better life, and I just felt they weren't getting it in Fairhaven. There was a false promise.
So what's the change that needs to happen in Fairhaven?
Accountability. Definitely.
What does that
I think
mean?
everything, I think just we've lost sight of holding people accountable for actions.
Like more specifically, police officers, school officials?
Everybody's included in that statement, from top to bottom. I look at it like I look at the kids in the school. If you let somebody get away with something, too many times, they're going to continue to do it, even if it's not the right thing to do.
So what are people getting away with in Fairhaven?
Well, we have a lot of open air drug markets right now, open air drug use, public drinking in some of our parks, just a complete lack of resources. There's been no major investment in infrastructure in Fairhaven in over 25 years.
What kind of infrastructure? Bridge repairs?
I mean, again, all
bike
included.
lanes?
There are sidewalks in my ward that have not been touched in my lifetime. I'm 40, just turned 49 this past weekend.
Mhm.
I'll use the site of Oyamale's Tacos right now at the corner of Lombard and Ferry. I tell people all the time that used to be Dairy Queen, and it was somewhere we walked as kids on an almost daily basis. And those are the same asphalt sidewalks that were there when I was a child, and that's not okay by me. And rather than sitting on the sidelines and complaining, I decided to do something, and this was the only thing I could do.
That's interesting. And Caroline Smith, like the other two here, you've already a long record. Like the years feel like many years. All the work you do in the community, everything from, working for C-Click Fix to starting Collab and helping all these people start entrepreneurial projects. To sort of, I would say, you're one of those unofficial people who bring people together because you know people and they trust you. And now, what made you decide to be going? And you also ran a community management team very well in downtown New Haven, and was just great. Had that experience.
She's a superstar.
She is, bringing people who kind of normally aren't in the same room together and all that good stuff. What made you think that being an alder would help you accomplish some of those goals you care about?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Paul. I mean, I think one theme I hear in all of us and hearing both your stories is one of love. And, I feel like I was really taken in by New Haven. Like New Haven took me under its wing. Maybe this resonates with you.
When
too,
you came to
yours.
Yale, yeah.
Yeah, I came here.
I fell in love with it even before I arrived. Look, I was looking at it. Yeah. I saw who was playing the Toads in the neighborhoods, and it was just great. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I mean, my mom immigrated to the United States from Korea. My dad grew up in North Carolina. His parents immigrated here from the UK, and then they landed in Kentucky. And then I came here to New Haven, and I completely fell in love with the city really quickly. I had that feeling of feeling a part of something bigger than myself really, really, really fast. You know how it feels. We all know how it feels. And I also saw people really fighting for this city. I think that's what really drew me. I saw high school students filling the streets around climate justice. I saw individuals holding institutions accountable to their high expectations. And so as a 17-year-old, I was like, this is a city that's really fighting for itself. I want to be a part of that fight. And I think there are so many different pathways to fight, and I've explored a lot of those things. Like, I see Collab or Building New Haven Bike Month as looking at the gaps in our social safety net and filling gaps in that infrastructure. And I think, running for alder and being a part of civic life in that way is another path to being able to, especially think on a systems level, to be able to create change. And I'm excited to see, hey, am I good at this?
I have no doubt you're good. Daniel Hunt says Frankie and Caroline are two great people, especially Frank. No offense to Caroline.
I'll tell you what, though.
I agree with that.
That Daniel Hunt, though, he's something else.
Yeah.
I mean, I've
He
watched
does a
him
lot
grow
of
up since a
some of the
little
work you
kid.
do.
I have his cousin's name tattooed on my arm. We talk about Quelly a lot.
I remember
And-
when Quelly was killed.
Yeah, that's
Across
Daniel
town,
is his
yeah.
cousin, and he meant a lot to Daniel. And I think, I don't want to speak for him, but I think it motivated his activism
Yeah.
a little bit, because a lot of people were affected by the loss of Marquel Banks.
Yeah, I remember that.
And
case.
Daniel recently won an award, so
Yeah.
congratulations.
Yeah,
Daniel.
he's amazing. He's another superstar.
So Caroline, so how does the alder fit into that? How do
Yeah.
you feel that alder is going to help you accomplish bringing progress to the community?
Totally. So, my professional background, as you mentioned, is me and another woman, Margaret, co-founded a local organization here called Collab that supports local entrepreneurs. It's really a belief in community-led growth and development. And something I notice over and over again is certainly some of the things that Collab provides are really beneficial. Things like one-on-one coaching, a little bit of financial support, helping to build a network around them. But also some of the things that we're saying in the way of local entrepreneurs, but also more broadly residents, were things like, hey, do I have access to affordable housing? Do I feel safe in my neighborhood? Do I have a horizon line of where I imagine myself going for myself? And I think a lot of those things really intersect with policy. How do we build really safe and affordable, walkable neighborhoods in the city? How do we, create a lot of abundant economic opportunity for residents here? And I think there's just so much possibility in the role as a legislator to really think really creatively, especially with a great team, especially with a really, really great team to think about that.
And who is your
Well said.
team? Is this the team? Is Unite Here the team? Who's the team on the board of Alders? Or
I
the
think
team you're going to be part of?
my sense, what I'm curious about, I'm curious how this resonates with you all, is that, New Haven is both a city with so much opportunity, but also really significant challenges. And it truly takes, I think it'll take all 30 of us
Yeah, I
to
agree.
really fight for that.
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, we've also have our own little team Fairhaven that hit the ground running months and months ago, working on little community projects. I've built my career on being a team player. I really don't like to be out in the forefront. I like to depend on people who are a little wiser and more skilled than me in other areas. My favorite quote is a Mother Teresa quote. It's tattooed on my bicep. I alone cannot change the world. I can only cast a stone across the water to create many ripples. And it's what
How
I
many
live my
tattoos
life
do you
by.
have? You've kind of described already like
I have
half your body.
Quite a lot. So I was a single dad for 25 years. I didn't have a lot of money to spend on myself. So when my son went away to school, it's my life story is tattooed on my body.
It's interesting. So, Kiana, we've talked about why someone thought being an alder could help you accomplish. You worked the climate justice movement. You've been studying policy, seeing your own family reflected in the story of New Haven on immigration. Why alder? You watched the campaign. What did you learn from those campaigns, and what had made you think that being an alder could help you make a difference?
I think what I took the most from working on Eli Sabin's campaign and then working under Alex Ghazneh is just like how in touch you can get with the community. And I think that even though I am a New Havener Yaley, I think all Yaleys at some point experience like this feeling of just being trapped in the bubble, because even though New Haven and Yale are so intermixed, and there's, when you walk the streets, you're walking not just at Yale, but in New Haven.
When I was an undergraduate and I lived on House Street, my friends didn't know where House Street was.
Yeah, exactly.
Their senior year, 2 blocks.
And it's like 2 minutes away. Like it's like right behind.
And it
Pearson
even goes
College.
back like 80 years. John Hersey wrote a novel about a Yale student. It was called Too Far to Walk. And that feeling of going more than 2 blocks.
Yeah,
It's
it's
too
like
far
impossible.
to walk, and your world gets so. You come here supposed to have your world opened, come into a world-class university, and yet it's, despite being physically in the middle of everything, the world really is shrunken there.
Yeah, and I think it's a really common phenomenon, like to just kind of feel stuck when you're like your head is so far down like a book, or you're just like worrying about the next exam that you kind of lose the sense of kind of community that maybe you had back home. And I think I started to kind of feel that my first few years of just like, whoa, like I feel kind of stuck, even though like I'm from here and I know so much about the city and I care so much about it. I felt kind of out of touch. And I think that being able to work with the Eli Sabin campaign and then under Alex, like it really gave me an opportunity and forced me to, we're hosting an event and we're going to talk to constituents, and that kind of like grounded me, I think. And I think that's something I experienced on this campaign as well, to just be able to like talk to New Haveners and talk to collaborate with other people who are making change in the city, and just kind of go back to my roots in that sense. So I think that was like the main thing that drew me to being Alders. It's kind of a way to kind of force in the calendar, like touching back with your community and seeing how you can uplift the community that, when I was little, definitely, and still uplifts me.
And I love following, in Caroline's campaign, she's great on social media. And I have fun, like, I don't try not to spend much time on social media, but I love every day she's somewhere in the community with someone who's like planted a garden, opened a restaurant, spent Saturday, cleaning the sidewalk, and that you get a real up. I remember for Yale students, when you get involved in New Haven, it sort of is their joy.
Yeah.
When you leave the bubble and you get just with people who are in a nice community, making it better. What I wanted to ask you folks, a moment from each of your campaigns when you're out in the community. Tell me about a moment that sticks in your mind while you're campaigning that might inform something you might do as an alder. Was there a day you'll never forget on the campaign trail?
There was many, but the one that stands out to me the most was actually when I walked with Caroline on her campaign. It just shows how long I've been around. We ran into a gentleman named Dale, who stands in at about 6'7", 6'6", 6'7", maybe, big guy. He's a big guy. And we get into a conversation, and Caroline asks him, well, how do you know Frank? He says, Frank was my security guard in 2nd grade at Columbus School. Caroline looked at him and said, well, how old are you? And he said, 39. And looked at me and said, how old are you? And I said, 48. And we did the math, and I was his security guard when he was in 2nd grade. So that's a reason why this means so much to me, because I have so many deep-rooted connections in Fairhaven. People know me. They know my work. They depend on me, and now they've put their trust in me that I'm going to be the same driven, dedicated, outspoken person that I've been my whole career.
Any thoughts from you, Carol? I mean, you have so many. I mean, every day's a memory on here. But what's the moment that really said, "Oh, this is what like the Alder thing is"?
Yeah. No, I'm really grateful for what you said, and I think really similar to Kiana, I didn't have an opponent, but I think both of us really tried to run a campaign that we felt like voters deserved, and so it was really exciting to run just a myriad of different kinds of events. One thing that was really special to me was working with different neighbors to host backyard parties.
Yeah.
One, I just got to see a lot of fascinating backyards throughout the city,
Yeah, definitely.
throughout the ward. But basically, a neighbor would open up their backyard, purchase food, and invite neighbors to have a conversation about, what are the challenges that we're seeing in the ward and in the city, and then what are our visions. And one memory that really sticks out is a backyard party. It was actually the last one. It was hosted by Charlie Nixon, who grew up in New Haven. He grew up in the Hill neighborhood. He remembers when the highways were built. He's one of those guys that every single time I talk to him, I have this little notebook where I write down little lessons, and every single time I talk to him, I write one down. And I loved the backyard party because it just took the shape of his personality, the personality of his neighbors and friends. It was a huge, he bought, so many things for a barbecue. We talked about music. We talked about everyone's stories of either growing up here or coming here and choosing to stay. It was a range of different people, from people who've 60 plus years old to people who had just come here a month ago, who are 21, 22 years old. And I think that was really special to me. And I think tying back to your question about sort of how does that reflect, into becoming Alder, I think that piece around community connection and around building neighborhoods where neighbors know each other, trust each other. And that's connected to things like, how do we invest in neighborhood corridors? How do we invest in walkable streets? How do we invest in making sure that our neighborhoods are affordable? All of that idea of how do we build communities that are really connected to each other stem to so many different policies that relate back to that.
Interesting. And then how about you, Kiana? Any moment on the campaign trail for you?
Probably.
And by the way, Carl G says, "God bless you, Frank." You definitely got fans listening to the show.
Monroe Street, Carl.
My what sticks out to me was probably the last day on election day, because it was definitely the most intense for me, like showing up in front of the library at 6 a.m. and it was pouring rain, and I was like, how am I going to put my table out? So it was kind of like the anxiety at the beginning of like, oops, I said I was going to be here rain or shine, and it's raining, so I still have to be here. So it was kind of like a big like campaign moment, like, oh, this is what election day looks like. And yeah, it was just an amazing way to really meet people outside of the Yale sphere in Ward 1. So I met a lot of people from the residential buildings, and, we got to talk a lot about certain policy ideas that people had or were interested in hearing my opinion about, such as like affordable housing. And then also being in front of the library, it was so cool. A lot of the staff from the library like came down and said like, oh, our boss like sent us an email that you were here, and we just like wanted to introduce ourselves and like talk about the library. And I think that in high school the library was a great place for me and my friends, because it was somewhere that you could be that was free, and you didn't have to buy anything to be there. And
You talk about main branch or Fairhaven?
The main branch. We remember like when the little cafe was there. So we talked a lot about, like that open space and, the potential for it, the way the library system is set up now, and like the potential
They no
to kind
longer
of
have the cafe there?
they no longer have the cafe. I
That's too bad
think
they didn't work.
they were telling me that they had like two companies or kind of businesses that tried to base their
Concord
operations there.
tried it,
Yeah, but it didn't end up working out. So that's kind of like up in the air of like what that space can be used for now. So it was really exciting to just, I don't know. I felt like that day being able to meet with so many people kind of felt like somewhere I could start, like looking at the library that's in the ward and seeing what we can kind of do with that and see how we can best serve the community with the library.
And you're listening to three new voices on the board of Alders. Not new voices in New Haven by any stretch of the imagination, but three community activists who decided that becoming an Alder was one way to help bridge and build communities in New Haven and make it a better city. Caroline Smith, Kiana Flores, and Frank Redenti at Dateline New Haven on WNHH FM. Who are your political role models? if you think about someone who, because politics, you always said, I've talked to people who are idealistic and saying, I'm a little worried if I get involved in politics, we'll have to sell out. Compromise can be a very good thing. Compromise can be great when you have a goal of what you want to achieve, and you have to like deal with people who don't agree with you, who represent other people, and not get everything you want, and vote for a complicated bill that has something you don't love, but it gets it over the line. And then other people obviously sell out because they want to get ahead, and they equate their own advancement with, they fall into that trap of equating their own advancement at any cost to what helps people. Who are your models who've done politics right? Any thoughts? Jump in, whoever wants to.
I'm happy to jump in. So my political role model, one of my heroes is the Boston mayor, Mayor Michelle Wu. For so many different reasons. One is that she was a really an example, to your point, Paul, of someone who was so clear about her values. She has a very strong spine. She's willing to compromise, willing to negotiate, but she's very clear about who she is. And it's very clear in the way that she leads that she's not going to adjust that spine. She's not going to adjust those values. And I think that was a real model for me. Obviously, also as an Asian American woman, I remember going to Boston and peeking inside Boston City Hall, which is such an epic building, and seeing her picture there. And it made me emotional. It made me emotional to see this incredibly intelligent, values-aligned woman who's Asian American be the mayor of one of the major cities. She's absolutely a role model.
And how's she doing in your view?
I think she's doing great.
And she wanted to do free buses. How's that working out?
I think more people are using the bus. I think the thing that admires me the most,
She has very similar issues to yours.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that she also really, I listened to her State of the City address, and almost 40 to 50% of the State of the City address was specifically acknowledging people on her staff. I think she really cares about staff morale, and I think that's why so many people have been attracted to work for the city as a result. And I think that's which obviously then has a relationship with high quality city services as well. And so I really appreciate the way that she's built a team.
I remember it just struck me when she was running. I happened to be at a Chinatown in Boston at a vegan restaurant, and her picture was up in the window, and it made me think that whole story of America, how groups are proud when they're one mark of their ascension in society or in a city is when people start getting elected. She's the first Asian American mayor. Is that part of what it is for you? Or?
Definitely. Absolutely. I think that, I think that representation isn't everything, but I think that representation allows you to imagine things for yourself. And, seeing her as a city council person, that helped me imagine, hey, that's a role that I could be in as well.
Wow. Anybody else? It's going to be a little bit tough to top, but any other?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
You don't have to do as well, by the way. It's not competition. Everybody gets an A.
No, I think when I just think locally of like the people I've worked with, I think definitely people like Eli and Sarah Miller definitely come to mind, just because I think that they are really great examples of like people who are really in tune with the community and who are constantly reaching out. And then, of course, like, I guess biased because I took a class with him, but I always do think about John DeStefano and his mayorship, even though I wasn't like fully conscious when he was, when he ran for those 20 years. But just being able to see, like, and I think it really does come down to all of the immigration reforms that happen, and just seeing like how much, how he allowed the community to lead him on those different efforts. And we talked a lot about in the class, like how it really was a grassroots effort. And, there were attempts to do that in other capacities as well, but the support in the community behind these policies for making New Haven a sanctuary city were just so strong and powerful. And I think that a lot of people in New Haven, especially in Fairhaven, still remember like his time as mayor, because
Did he tell you about when the federal government was mad at him about this and they raided Fairhaven and basically shut down the neighborhood?
Yeah,
and
we talked a lot
with
about
Kika
this.
Matos and said,
Yes, he did.
we're not going to back down.
Yes, he did.
And
Yeah.
it was a pretty strong moment. He was fired up for that whole immigration. He
And
felt it deeply.
And
Yeah.
like people definitely remember that and remember that about him. Like as a part of this class, we actually like, go to Fairhaven and we take like a Yale shuttle to different spots in Fairhaven. And
Your shuttle goes to Fairhaven?
For this, it's like a special field trip.
Oh,
so like we
if
like
Professor
charter one.
DeStefano calls
Yeah.
up,
Yeah. And we were like walking up into Junta, and like a lady just like walks by and she's like, "You're DeStefano, right?" And like it's just like crazy like how much like he's had an impact on so many people, especially in the Fairhaven area.
And I said, those are good. And in terms of Miller and Sabin, what was it that impressed you most about seeing them as a model?
Yeah, I think for like working under Eli Sabin for the for his election to Ward 7, I think it was just really insane to see like how organized he is and like how much he's like always trying to reach out to the community. Like he's very punctual about his newsletters, making sure that people are like aware of what's happening on the board. That's how I pretty much stay informed about like what's happening on the board. And then also just like how much he cares about, really making innovative policy. So I really admire that about him. And then also just Sarah Miller being someone that I've been connected with since high school through like climate activism and then also like New Haven Rising. It's just really inspiring to see like Fairhaven getting the representation it needs. Like, I think it's really helpful that she's very involved in the Hispanic community in Fairhaven, and that she's been doing a lot in terms of the Grand Avenue area. And, I think that is just really inspiring.
And Frank, you had a little time here.
Yes, I mean, my list is extensive just because I'm blessed to be from Fairhaven. We've had so many quality leaders grow up in and around Fairhaven. The Al Pilillos, the Martin Looneys, the Juan Candelarias, Joey Rodriguez. I mean, I could go on.
But tell me somebody who you see as this is someone who does politics in a way that
so
I
the
could
decision
learn
for me to run for Alder, Paul, was I was inspired by others to lead. People like Caroline Smith and Sarah Miller. I met them initially when I first started working with CTVIP and started canvassing, both on my own for VIP and with Clifford Beers around community violence. And I just watched them work, and they inspired me to want to do the same.
Is there somebody on the world stage or in history in the country right now who either of you looks at and says that's a way to do politics, to make change in a positive way, working within the system?
My worldview is really small right now. Not that I don't pay attention, but just that I'm hyper focused on Fairhaven right now.
That's
I really am.
I mean, Alder. And then there are also citywide issues. I want to ask you folks, schools. We have a new school superintendent. We've revamped how we do reading, which actually your two models had a lot to do with. What next with the schools? What do we need to do now with education? There's sort of issues that I think are not at all endemic to New Haven. Since the pandemic, with the social emotional freak out, the loss of learning, the kind of social media, I do think has become a real problem for teenagers' lives. The latest revelation about Instagram, where they actually studied all these 13-year-olds and were aware of the vulnerabilities they could exploit for profit. Any thoughts among any of what you'd like to see happen with the schools?
Well, first off, I think we're in the right direction with hiring Dr. Negron. She was one of, if not the main reason I decided to send my son to career high school. I mean, she was an amazing administrator. So I think we're in the right direction there. But I think it's a team approach where we get a lot of different people to the table, hear different people's opinions. Again, I'm that team approach person. I want to hear everybody's opinion. And I'm of the mind that you have to have balance in everything. You can't just yell and scream and force your way. You have to find common ground with everybody, and not everybody works for everybody. Not everything works for everybody, but I think there's enough room for everybody at the table.
What really fascinates me, I think that a lot when we write about New Haven. I always enjoy having when you have a policy that you got from a classroom or an article about how you think something should work, and then the rubber hits the road when you meet people in the community, how it doesn't work for everybody. I'm thinking about parking minimums. So I'd assume, I don't know if this isn't fair, that a bunch of us really like the idea of not requiring so many cars when you build something, right? Like when we build some new place people live, not everyone's going to have a car anymore. We want them to be able to walk. There's less pollution for the climate. The streets are more walkable. But then when you try to make new rules like we've been trying to do right now and changing our zoning code, they walk into the hill where the streets are so crowded together and there is no place to park and people need cars to go to work. And when we want more density to build housing closer together as part of that kind of new urbanist vision and more affordable housing, that ran up against, well, we can hear exactly what's happening in the house next door and we want a little space, so we don't want your rules for how close things to be together, how little parking you need. Any thoughts about that when you think about the rezoning of the city, how to accomplish these larger goals?
Yeah.
You talked about commercial corridors, so it's obviously on your plate.
Definitely. Yeah. I think there's a lot of room for us to think about whether our zoning code right now reflects the needs and the goals of the city. I think there's a lot of interesting work that can happen there. Like one very clear example, it's a little different than what you're talking about, but is our licensing and permit process for businesses. For example, I, as walked up and down Upper State Street, I think also, in running Collab, experiencing a lot of the barriers and challenges that entrepreneurs face. And something that I think is really worthwhile is how do we streamline our licensing and permitting process so that it's more equitable to be able to start a business here.
And
That's
so
just
how does that work? Like certain rules you really need because you want the public to be
That's right,
safe and you want to
exactly.
be honest, but also
Yep.
some of them are archaic and they're no longer relevant. What have you found specifically in that process?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's about just understanding what the rules are. So, for example, East Rock Breads is a bakery that's trying to start on Upper State Street in the ward, and it's taken him over a year to be able to start. And something that he articulated that he really desired was like, he wanted to have a checklist. You know, what is the process? So I think that's first and foremost. So let's
So
just
what
really
needs to be on
understand.
there, like building code,
Yep.
kitchen permits, health
kitchen
code?
permits. I also think creating incentives for some of the things that are, I think, really beneficial for our community, things like outdoor seating, things like, being able to utilize backyard patios, so that it's just more, helps
So you
make
want it to be
businesses.
easier for that. And they have been working on that.
Exactly.
Including like climate change, which is warmer
Right.
over the winter.
Yep.
Coffee can keep their patio,
That's right. That's right. And that's just an example to your broader question around, okay, does our zoning currently reflect the needs of the city? Small businesses is one example. Of
I'm
where
interested
we,
now.
if we're first
What else
about
can be streamlined? You think besides making it easy to use outdoor patios and giving people checklists so they know it won't take more than a year of everything they have to do, which is really good
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
What else? Is there any rules that are outdated or any extra expenses that aren't needed?
You mean specifically as it relates to businesses or more broadly?
Small business, yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, maybe this is slightly different, but I think generally, I think I've been really inspired. I mean, there was just a press conference about a grander Grand Avenue, which was both about, thinking about how our city is currently set up to support small businesses, but it's also about investment in neighborhood corridors. And that was a significant multi-million-dollar investment that's going to be made into Grand Avenue.
Right.
And I'd love to see something similar for other business corridors.
And
as
what
well.
kind of investments? Public space improvements or loans to work on your business?
I think it's a myriad of different things. I think it might depend on the needs of the businesses and the needs of that neighborhood. It might be things like, how do we make it easier to fill empty storefronts? How do we make it easier in the meantime of, where we do have empty storefronts for local vendors and artists to be able to activate those empty storefronts? I think about Tiffany, who started Crafters of Color, who's been creating these vendor fairs. She created one right next to 360 State Street, utilizing that one plot. How do we make it easier in the
and
city?
it is interesting
for,
to have to rethink what a business is, right? Because of pounds change. So all over the country, commercial real estate is tanking. People aren't going to the office as much. They're telecommuting. What the city's trying to figure out what to do with old office buildings and rezoning those. Any thoughts about properties in New Haven that need to be rethought? I mean, even a generation ago, we rethought 900 Chapel and turned most of that to housing. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't have any specific policy ideas specifically to that, but I think that something that I've been hearing a lot in the Ward 1 area, especially since housing and homelessness is such a pressing issue there because it's so visible. And I think that's because, a lot of people that was on front of mine when they were kind of approaching me and talking about like what I thought about affordable housing. And I think that, a lot of other issues, like we talk a lot about in climate change, like generally that the certain approach that we need to have is kind of just like throw everything onto the wall and see what sticks. And of course, that's not like how you should approach everything because there is like a budget and there is like a timeline. But
That's
I
kind of
think
how we
that-
do it at our shop, actually.
and I think that that's like a similar way to approach what has become such an all-encompassing issue on affordable housing because it's so complex and nuanced. And, we've seen a lot of innovation in the city with, for example, like the tiny houses being a different
What do you think
approach.
about what's happening on Rosette Street? And should there be as much regulation? Should they? Because they're worried. Remember the artist place in the old factory right near there in the hill where all these artists were living, and the person who ran the art factory wasn't meeting any building codes. There were no fire exits, and the city shut it down. And a few weeks later, the ghost ship, similar facility in Oakland, all these people died because they're doing the same kind of like parties there. And they said that's why you need that regulation. But then on Rosette Street, they're saying, we also want this to be safe when you have people living. They're not really tiny houses. They're kind of like small structures.
Yeah.
And they're saying, there are too many rules here. In fact, we do have it safe for electricity. What's your read on the whole thing?
I think going off of what Caroline was saying is that, of course, there's a balance. Like, there are codes for a reason, and things need to be built in a safe way to make sure people living there are able to live safely. But I do think that that is perhaps one of the things that could be better streamlined by the city, because I think that in the conversations I've had about housing, like the urgency of getting people housed, especially as it's getting colder, and having people out on the streets when it's freezing should not happen. And I think that the tiny houses are really great in that they can be put up really quickly and immediately used. And so I think that has been like a source of innovation and hope for a lot of people in the city of like housing, which has felt like an issue that is almost too big to tackle. And so I think that is like the innovation that should be spurred on in the city. And perhaps there is a way for the city to maybe not necessarily like lighten up on the codes, but allow there to be a streamlined process in order to, lighten up or make it easier to build more housing, especially when it is so.
It's just to
needed.
me the homeless settlements that Nora Grace Flood's been writing about, the tent cities and stuff. How many people come from other communities that don't let them stay there? There's one person we interviewed, was camping out in Brantford. No, you're on the boot. You're coming to New Haven. Somebody else from Waterbury.
Quite a few.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
It's the same thing with our drug addicted population. We see a lot of it, especially in Fairhaven. A lot of them aren't from the area. I really can't tell you the reason why. I definitely think we need to start thinking outside the box, like both these young ladies said, as far as housing. I also think we need to have more of a focus on landlord accountability.
I wanted to ask you about that. What would you do about the mega landlords, the ocean landlords who aren't keeping up their properties?
I again, as a lifelong Fairhavener, I see a lot of the changes in these streets directly affected by the lack of owner-occupied homes. And I feel like as someone who's actively looking for another home in Ward 15, and I've been rebuffed numerous times by being outbid by investors.
Right, that's one
we
problem.
We need to look at
they have
somehow
cash.
creating some kind of an incentive for New Haven residents to have first crack at some of these homes before they're offered to the mega landlords. Maybe like a 90-day window where they're only available
I know.
to.
So I was thinking, you talk about when John DeStefano was mayor. So he was mayor in the 90s when Bill Clinton was president.
Right.
And he had named Henry Cisneros as the head of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And they said the big thing is we're going to make everyone homeowners in cities.
Yeah.
So they put a lot of money into it. We had the Livable City Initiatives actually started as freeing up property, help people become homeowners. And they did everything we could. I remember DeStefano saying there are people, like Frank's mentioning, who you can really help a bunch of people become homeowners, but there's a limit. So they did everything they could, all the money, all the efforts, all the outreach. And we went, these aren't the exact numbers, but it's in the ballpark. I think we went from 33 to 37% of our city being homeowners. And then after that point, it actually didn't make sense for other people to be homeowners. Like, you don't want the mega landlord as a slumlord there. You want to keep after them to come up with the code. But his conclusion from that was that, yes, he totally agreed with you guys that you have to have good policy to help people who it makes sense to become homeowners. But for a variety of reasons, homeowning doesn't make sense for a lot of people. We are going to be a majority renter city. And that's always just been interesting to me.
In that case, then you have to be
Hard on the landlords.
extra tough on these landlords, because that was one of the number one things that we heard in our campaign in 15. I think about the lady who works in my school cafeteria, who lived in her house on Pine Street for 30 years, was purchased by one of the mega landlords, and she was told she had to be out by October. That was it. So
the Fair Rent Commission has been strengthened.
She has been
It's
in
kind
touch
of really
with Fair
interesting
Rent.
stuff. Yeah. And one thing you do as an Alders, you put people in touch with that.
Yeah.
How about safe injection sites? That's been controversial. Fairhaven and other cities have started experimenting with the idea that if people are using opiates, especially opioids, and they're overdosing, if you have a place that's not right on the street where they can gather so you're not bothering neighbors, and where they can more safely, even though it's not a safe process, shoot up, and then they can have their help in cases of OD, and if they want drug treatment, it's available there. In the mayor campaign, that discussion got a little bit sidelined by a candidate who got people scared about it. And there are people in Fairhaven, just business owners, say that's crazy to me. Then you have all these junkies coming. And other people say, yeah, people are struggling with drug addiction. They're going to be here anyway. They could either do it in a more safe way and get help or not. What's your take on it, Frank?
Again, I go to balance. All right. You can't be too far one way or the other. I agree that there's a need for it. It shouldn't be in residential areas. It should be properly staffed by, medical and mental health providers.
You ever thought about a good location? The thought was on Grand.
I believe it's Grand and Haven, if I'm not mistaken, which is in proximity to Fairhaven Clinic, which makes sense, so they'll have quality providers there. But again, with the balance, there also needs to be an accountability on the streets. as somebody who struggled with addiction in my late teens and early 20s before becoming a single father, I'm very sympathetic. I have family members who struggle with opiate addiction. I don't want to see it criminalized, but in the same breath, I have respect for those families who don't want to look out their living room window to see someone laying on their sidewalk with a needle sticking out of their arm. So there has to be balance. If we're going to spend X amount of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on safe injection sites, we have to show that same respect to those people living in those communities that are plagued by it right now. So it's a tough conversation.
It is.
There's no easy answer. It takes a lot of compassion, and again, it takes everybody at the table with the same view, and it's finding common ground. That should be everybody's goal. How do I find common ground? It's how I deal with my kids in the school. I'll get a call from a teacher or from the office saying a teacher needs me. I get up to the classroom. I don't ignore what the teacher's telling me that happened, because nine times out of 10, that's what happened. I want to hear what the kid had to say first, because I still have to find common ground between the two, the child and the student. I look at everything the same way.
You might be describing the board all. Sorry. So, Caroline and Kiana, what do you think about safe injection sites?
Yeah, I think there's a relationship between the conversation we're about housing and about the challenges that we're facing with addiction in our community. I think I look to a city like Houston. So Houston,
that was just featured this weekend in the New York Times.
Exactly right. Definitely worth a read. Basically, since 2011, they reduced their people experiencing homelessness by 60%, and they named 3 different reasons why. One, and some of these things are already happening in New Haven, which is exciting. So one was bringing a coalition of providers together to really work.
I was looking at that. Said, but we have that. Was it 211? What's the number?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
I was thinking, we did that 10 years ago.
Exactly. So, and I think what was interesting too is it was coordinated access between nonprofits and also city agencies, which I think was really interesting. And yes, I'm on the board of Liberty Community Services and United Way, and so I watch the ways in which these organizations really collaborate a lot together, and I think that's exciting. And then 2, they made it, and this goes back to the conversation around zoning, they made it easier to build housing, easier, cheaper, and more effective to be able to build housing. And then 3, and this is where it's connected to the conversation we're having about addiction, I think they really implemented a housing first model, that they said, okay, individuals are going to come to us with a myriad of different challenges they face. Let's make sure that they have a roof over their head, and that's one of the best ways to stabilize them, such that they can be on the path to be able to having a more stable life. And so I think there's a relationship between these 2 conversations we're having.
Do you ever say no when somebody asks you to be on a board? Like, is it physically possible being on the board you get invited to be on?
Yeah, I always think about, am I going to be of use? I mean, in general in my life, I think about that. And then specifically as it relates to organizations, will I be of use and valuable?
Well, I have no doubt that all 3 of you will be of use and very valuable on your new mission as Alders in the city of New Haven. I always admire people willing to put in all those hours, because you're not really paid. I mean, that's a stipend. So good work, folks. Getting started. We're going to bring you back. Ask how it went. Caroline Smith, Ward 9. Kiana Flores, Ward 1. Frank Redente, Ward 15. All with the connection to Fairhaven. Newly elected board elder. Good luck.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks so much for joining us on Dateline New Haven. Thanks to Harry Dross behind the controls. We're going to take a break for about 15 minutes. And we're going to be back with Reverend Benita Grubbs, who has an announcement for us at the second hour of Dateline New Haven. In the meantime, we're going to listen to the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from their CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass, inviting you to fly free with us at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.